Welcome everyone, Simon here from the Whales of Wall Street, an XDC video up in front of us today. Before we go into this one, check out the other videos on the channel as well, and also more recently the really interesting interview that we did with Digital Pound Foundation. Go check it out. It's more related around CBDCs, but certainly what we have got there is information on the pros and the cons, and also potentially an opportunity for us, the general public, to have our say on CBDCs before it goes any further. Time is running out, not necessarily for the video, I'm talking about CBDCs in general, to voice our opinions and thoughts. So go check that out, see what you think. Let us know in those comments below as well. And don't forget to smash that subscribe button if you have not done so already. We welcome new people to the channel, of course, existing ones as well. Thank you for coming back to watch this one. So let's go into the topic of XDC, guys. So I haven't covered this one for a few weeks. I'm going to kick this off with this this post a few days ago from Andre Casterman here on LinkedIn. Very much talking about trade finance industries and transportation industries with the utilization of what they call like digital practices, but the utilization obviously of blockchain or the integration of that as well. Now, he mentions here two things: IFTA, which is a big organization that he's part of, but he also mentions DNI. This is important. So this is digital negotiable instrument. We'll go into a bit more detail on that in a second. But for sure, what's really interesting about this conversation, kind of tailing off really of what we spoke about with XDC before, is the incorporation of blockchain and what XDC stands for in these years to come. Is very heavily focusing itself around the trade markets, the trade initiatives right now, and has kind of been focusing on that for a year or so, as it kind of delved from that kind of hybrid blockchain format, which it still is, of course, and still has abilities to apply itself to a multitude of sectors and industries around the world. But for me in particular, when we talked about the trade finance and trade in general, how much that is worth in terms of trillions upon trillions of dollars, it really does make an interesting story when you talk about the tokenization of something. Now, for me, the tokenization aspect, of course, the process of issuing a digital token running on blockchain. Now, this can be either a tangible and intangible aspect, tangible being things like houses, real estate, aspirations, like things like commercial estate as well, stocks in general. And we've obviously seen like tangible assets in terms of things like artwork in the past, whether that be kind of like through NFTs or art in general. Actually is a really interesting topic about art, which we'll probably do a video on, because there are actually teams out there about fraudulent activity of art and particularly the big pieces that cost a lot of money. So there's loads of other things like that, cars, etc. We talked about like physical NFTs, physical tangible aspects of digitalization of products and manufactured items. Intangible being things like voting, things like patents, and things like loyalty points, which is a very interesting one actually, because we've got another video coming out this week about brand interaction. It comes off the back of a Fireblocks Web3 event that I was speaking at, and I found it a really interesting subject about how brands can utilize things like NFTs and Web3 to enhance their awareness and also their interaction with their customers or potential customers. But that's very interesting around the loyalty points section. Keep an eye out for that video because I think it'd be quite interesting. But in the trade aspect, for these kind of like tangible assets and a kind of a bit of a cross reference over to the intangible as well, there's a need or a requirement to try and automate as much of this as possible and remove as many intermediaries as possible as well. Why would they want to do that? Well, there's loads of kind of different reasons. So in this particular instance, when we talk about DNI, which is a really interesting website that comes up on here through ITFA about trade, the original use cases. Now, there's some things in here that I never even thought about, but we've covered kind of a few of these things in the past. This kind of section here, more about you as an individual, perhaps, when we look at like smart contract interaction here, diplomas, you've got health certificates or health in general, health history, health data, contracts, agreements, all these things that can happen within law, that can happen within deeds, or you as an individual in terms of your actual personal situations. You've got certificates on here, which loads of different things, in particular ESG, of course, like the environmental, social governance. You've got things like food and organic certification. Now, this is a really interesting point. This will loop back to what we're going to talk about in a second. But it's this bit here. First of all, the cross-reference of the finance part and also the transport and logistics. Now, going back to this topic here about what Andre is talking about here, this is the pledge, BIMCO's 25 by 25 pledge to move the transport and logistics industry into the 21st century digital practices. And he's mentioned that extremely welcome on the banking side, as financial institutions ought to reduce operational costs and mitigate fraud risks when handling trade documents. Now, this is a part of the documentation and the finance side of it, but they're also talking here about the technologies that can be incorporated to the trade systems too. And this is where this part comes in here. Now, this is really interesting. So the bill of lading's something that stood out for me. I didn't actually kind of understand bill of lading until a few days ago. Rail and sea and warehouse aspects I understand. I've been heavily involved in distribution and logistics in the past in my career. But bill of lading is very much focused around legal documentation, kind of detailing things like quantity, the type, destinations, the recipient, all of these things that perhaps could happen, a customs check or something that you receive in goods, whether that's you as an end user or a company itself, understanding exactly where this has come from, and being transparent, being legitimate in what's actually in the container, what's actually in the boxes that are being sent to you, and everything that's associated with that. To be incorporated utilizing blockchain, which is obviously used for processing and verification, the transparency, the A to Z of it, if you like. And that's one that really interestingly stood out for me in that aspect. Cargo and marine insurance certificate is also interesting as well. The amount of time, guys, that is taken in transport, from certainly things like sea and air, and the intermediaries in place of that to check these things, from as I mentioned just a minute ago about customs, but also the checking on both the recipient side and the send out side, the distributor side, is quite a long process. A lot of people involved in that, a lot of potential processing, and certainly still in today's world, very manual in most cases, but some of it is becoming automated. So I'm just looping back around to that automation conversation between tangible and intangible. If you think about trade in general, let's forget the supply mechanism side, the logistics side. Think also about like the cross-border payments, the exchange rates. When I worked in distribution, there's always a bit of a headache around utilizing exchange rates, especially the dollar, because a lot of trade and supply and everything like that is done using the dollar currency across the world. And you've got to think on that side of things, the complexities of that changing every day, how that affects your bottom line potentially over a few days, over a few weeks, over a few months, over the year, and especially in your financial year. So when we talk about tokenization and the utilization of blockchain, and we start to create a pattern here of how we can improve these systems, but also improve the way we do business. In the trade section, ironically, we did a video on this with VeChain about a week or so ago around supply chain management. Now, this is a huge amount of money cost at the moment, where more of it is becoming automated, but that whole entire management system can now essentially be done on AI algorithms, data based on supply and demand, behavioral insights of when consumers are purchasing, environmental factors, weather factors, all of these things can be put into the equation when it comes to blockchain powering of this. And XDC has a big part to play with this, especially if you think about the Trada token, which is obviously powered through the XinFin network. You can loop that back round to things like what we just mentioned about the exchange rates, the cross-border payments, the cross-border fees when you're transacting across overseas, for example, and sometimes that can take days to make that transaction fully processed and checked and everything like that for money laundering, fraud. Obviously, the processing in general is quite a long process. One thing that stands out for me, which kind of links really with DIDs, digital identities, but more in the logistics side, is the checking aspect, but also the ID and the traceability of things. And it's really interesting because if we think about the sustainability goals, i.e. Agenda 30, the UN's program about sustainability, diversity, etc., this tracing mechanism is really important. First of all, from an ethics perspective, in terms of like, is the person who is creating the product originally getting paid enough? And that's incorporated within blockchain as a data imprint. And you as a user can consciously buy something or not buy something based on that entire history. You could do it from a sustainability perspective of like, how far has this product come from? Has the person that's made this or peoples that have made this been fairly treated? Have they been fairly paid? All of these things. I would find it quite funny with the fair trade logo, because it's kind of like a marketing gimmick really, because I still don't think they're getting what they should actually deserve, but they put a badge on it to make it feel like it's more of a consumer conscious friendly thing. But wouldn't it be great that if you scanned a QR code on your baked beans or rice or whatever it might be, that you could actually see the entire history, the whole entire traceability of where that product's come from, how far, the emissions, do you offset those carbon emissions, all those kind of things. But also, am I ethically buying something or buying something that's ethically produced and being paid for properly? So really interesting on that side of things. But in general, the tracing mechanism is quite interesting. I can't remember the project name. I think it's called like T Food or something. Very heavily involved in the full tracing mechanism of food and produce. Go check that one out. It's actually a really old one, actually. I used to hold a few years back. But it's exactly that kind of principle. Counterfeiting, of course, we mentioned about customs and all these kind of things, and supply and demand. Now, this is where the integration of AI and data and cloud comes in, especially from the SaaS services aspect kicks in as well. And property transfer. So, buying it off someone, essentially not until the payment's made and then it's officially yours. There's all of these kind of things that can be done contractually, booked in systems, all these kind of things can literally all be done now with the new mechanism of blockchain and cloud integrating with each other. So when this loops back around to these points that Andre Kossmann was mentioning here from the DNI perspective, you can really start painting a picture of what kind of instruments need to be put in place for this, but also to encourage the reduction in costs, the reduction in terms of speed, where things take such a long time for processing and checking all these things, to make it more efficient and more cost effective. Because the more intermediaries you take out, guys, the more effective it becomes. And I think this is really important. If you think about the economy and you think about how much money is spent, there's an argument to say that if you keep automating things, you're going to lose people, obviously. And that does slightly concern me. I think there's a lot of industries that have felt that for the last 10 years, let alone with the fact that now AI is kind of coming into full swing, and it's pretty much the integration of blockchain as well. So you kind of have to prepare yourself really to be like, oh, do I need to change jobs soon? Because this is all kind of like taking over. The fact of the matter is that all this manual checking, all this manual forecasting, and again, from my side, I've been very heavily involved in forecasting of products based on supply and demand in the markets, based on how good a product is or bad a product is, or the life cycle of a product. It might be being changed with another one. Forecasting that is very manual and time conscious process. That essentially can be automated now, as can the opportunity to send those orders, to send that forecast, to potentially eliminate things like exchange rates and all these kind of things, because we're utilizing tokenization now, and potentially fractionalized tokenization, which means that you completely break it down even further to absorb these costs, to make them faster, to process them faster, and make that transaction faster as well. Very interesting indeed. And in fact, this DNI initiative, guys, right, there are over 2,000 members now from over 130 countries. Now, this is quite phenomenal because the companies that are involved are heavily related in terms of the logistics and supply chain mechanism of the industry, which I think is absolutely really interesting to really observe this and how powerful this is from a monetary perspective, but also how fast now these kind of companies are reacting to try and save money and try and avoid these intermediary costs. That's where XDC XinFin comes in, because it can help with this tokenization aspect and from its blockchain perspective as well. To have people like Andre is really important because of his networking ability, but also his attributes towards these kind of organizations like the DNI initiative and the ITFA especially, is a really powerful opportunity to go ahead with. Sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know, and certainly Andre is one of those absolute top level people that you would want as an advisor, but also someone that's got such amazing ability to bring all these kind of companies together and orchestrate this kind of interaction and integration moving forward. So I just thought I'd bring those kind of points together because it kind of tells the whole story that we always talk about in various different projects, about AI, about DIDs, about the tracking and traceability of things, the data incorporation, the data imprinting on blockchain for processing and verifying. In the trade sector, this is massive and it's a huge focus. And this is very much kind of emphasized in these particular pieces of information. This article I'll leave a link to in the description below. This was created and written by, forgive me if this got this wrong, but Mirav. And it's absolutely fantastic. It's really detailed and it's going into really top information about tokenization. Why is this important? Why is this such a huge deal to everyone? Even to things about property, which we covered in the past. But more importantly, in this particular conversation was around trying to remove the intermediaries and also create the opportunity for things to move faster and for companies to essentially become more cost effective and more efficient. So really interesting indeed. And I'll leave a link to this one as well. This one's written by Andre, and it's very much going into finer detail about why DLTs, i.e. blockchain, is such an integral part, not just in trade, but in finance in general, particularly banking. So it's really exciting to see these kind of developments, these kind of conversations, because I do think we're in a really interesting area of blockchain development and integration and adoption, certainly over these next few years as we lead towards the 2030 goals. And I always harp on about that because ultimately, guys, the UN's infrastructure through the World Economic Forum and all these things for the Agenda 30 program, you just have to follow the money. You have to do the dot connecting and understand that actually all these incorporated technologies are striving towards this goal. And majority of companies in the world, whether they have a blockchain system already or not, or making their own or not, they will be having to abide by all this, and they will have no choice but to adopt this kind of technology along with the others. AI, cloud, of course. We've got an interesting video coming up from Casper about the Google Cloud scenario that's been happening recently. But this is very much a huge opportunity to look at the potential scalability of this, not just from the growth of the prices of these tokens and the utilization of them, but blockchain and the technology in general. It's so early, guys. But for me personally, the trade finance side of things and trade in general, because of what I know from my experiences and personal interactions in my career, as well as my information and knowledge that I've built over the years of blockchain and cryptography, AI is, I've worked with artificial intelligence for a long time as well. I see the bigger picture, and I hope that you guys start to do so, or if you haven't done so, hopefully you do. But I think there's a huge future here, guys, as the years go by. But yeah, for me, XDC is one of those fantastic kind of like hybrid blockchain technologies and opportunities, and I think that it's got a huge future ahead. And I do think it's certainly worth, for sure, going into the price point right now as we kind of wrap that conversation up. So I'll just get the chart up for you guys here now. You can see we've had a nice little rally on XDC over the last month, which is great to see. as a holder of XDC. I'm not selling XDC personally for a long time. I'm holding it to at least 2025 and beyond. But I do like to always see opportunities to grab XDC on the kind of like dips that we have, opportunities to see this certainly upcoming and in the near future as well. So currently hitting that price point of around 4 cents, which is really interesting because we're now matching back towards these kind of price points that we saw in August 2022. But also more importantly for me, from my side of things, is the rejection that we saw throughout May and June last year, as well as we continued that downward trend like most of the market did. Now we're nowhere near some of these higher points. We certainly got very close to it, to be honest, in this area. In fact, it might have actually just about hit it. So where we had this take up here on the 21st of March, this top end right up here at 4.7 cents actually matched, I believe, just so close, our lower region of this box that we drew back here in March 2022 as an identifiable position of resistance and support. And it doesn't always happen overnight, guys, or in a few weeks time. Sometimes you have to wait even longer, sometimes even a year, to see that potentially coming back to test. And lo and behold, it pretty much did. I'm actually quite staggered by that, of how close that was. But more importantly, it's not so much the box, it's more this area in general as we try and penetrate that 5 cent fib retracement level. So that in mind, we are at a very interesting point because that did retract and it's now starting to bounce between this kind of 3.8 mark and the 4 cent mark. Okay, so what does this mean? This means we've had the retraction and now we're going to probably try and stabilize ourselves around this marker as we test this kind of area. First of all, that bottom area, that box area that we mentioned just a minute ago, and some of these kind of tip up points here that we saw, as I mentioned, in August as well, and the rejection here in June last year. We need to do that to test these areas, both on the upward spectrum and the lower spectrum, to identify the new support levels for us to take us further up in the chart. Now, I don't think personally I can see this going up continuously as the weeks go by. I do think we'll get a bit of stabilization. It's had a fantastic run, but this gap, in my opinion, is too fast, too quick, and we do need to potentially come back down and test these areas properly. So we've had a nice reaction over the last couple of days, bounced back upwards to here, hitting this 4 cent mark. Sorry, 4 cent? Yeah, 4 cent mark on this macro level fib level here. And what I'm suggesting that we might see over the next week or so is this kind of like sideways movement trading, but potentially to come back down to this area to test here and potentially back at this area here as well. So my buy orders, I think I've got them all kind of scattered around, but for me personally, I will have my order back here just around the 3.49 cent mark and just down here at the 3.1 cent mark. Okay, so first of all, these are related to the fib level lines here and here, but also more importantly, the reactions that we've seen, albeit very small, where you see this kind of like stepping stone approach, which does match back in line with where we've drawn the previous areas of interest back throughout last year pretty much. So they're kind of like the areas that I'm interested in to take some potential allocation and accumulation into my portfolio of XDC. My ultimate target would love to get to 1 million, a bit quite far off of that still, but I do think there's plenty of opportunity for XDC at some lower regions to keep accumulating. But yeah, for sure, those that like to day trade or like that kind of these kind of big jumps, hopefully you've made some good markers here and some good profits. Of course, in the RSI terms, 75 on the 14-day, I'm referring to down here now. 75 on the 14 days is quite high, as is the 28 days. So for me, it's not personally, it's not a buying opportunity right now from a DCA perspective. I want to see that calm down a bit before I make a bit of a constructed decision on accumulating a bit more of that. The 90 days showing really strong patterns at 58. I haven't seen that there for a long time. So I'm really interested to see the next week or two for XDC. It's had a fantastic run. The week is 15% up. 49% up on the month, which is brilliant. 50% up on the 3 months. It's green pretty much across the board apart from the 1 year. And there's not many assets that can boast green in all of those areas. So it's just giving an indication there's a lot of confidence in XDC, there's a lot more talk about it, a lot more understanding and knowledge around it as well. And you've got people like Andre pushing it as also, not from a shilling perspective, but actually finally more and more people are talking about the utilization of it, the importance of why our existing infrastructures worldwide, whatever sector it might be in, could benefit, or how they can benefit from blockchain and DLT infrastructure. And this is where XDC gets exciting for me, because it is really positioning itself massively in a phenomenal, massive market upon trillions of dollars worth of value. And it's got a massive mechanism behind it, massive partnerships, a lot of integrations with like R3, Quant, etc. And this becomes even more important as we see more adoption in the financial markets towards things like the ISO 222 standardizations and messaging, the integration of the new RTDS system, and potentially a CBDC platform as well. It all links together, guys. But for sure, it's always nice to see some chains and some projects focus particularly on a specific area. And I think that these guys can absolutely nail the trade finance and trade tokenization perspective, which is a humongous piece of the pie. So guys, let us know what you think about that in the comments below. Sorry, it's a bit of a long one. I just think it's important to shout about all this really interesting information, but more importantly, the reasons and the solutions that blockchain can provide, especially with utilization of things like XDC as a token and its utility within blockchain, to provide some really intricate solutions to some world problems that we have now, and to improve the way everyone does business and speed up the economy potentially as well. So guys, let us know what you think. Thanks for watching this one. We will see you in the next XDC XinFin video. Bye bye.